Is America a Christian nation? It seems when you ask this question, is America a Christian nation, you often are confronted with one of two possible answers. So you have some people on one end of the spectrum saying, oh, yes, absolutely, America is a Christian nation. And, this is God's country and we need to restore it for God's sake, and et cetera, et cetera. Almost like America is the promised land that God promised to Israel. But then you have people on the other end of the spectrum saying, no, America not at all in any way, shape, or form is not a Christian nation. And the answer to that question, I think, is not found in either one of those two stances. I think the issue is a little bit more complicated than that. And so I think the answer is ultimately yes, in many senses, America is a Christian nation, but also in some senses, no, it's not. And I think understanding that nuance can be helpful. And as Christians, I think it's important for us to understand, the context that we find ourselves in and how we should think about the place that we live, the country that we live in, our Babylon, and to understand it better. So let me describe when I say America is not a Christian nation, what I mean by that. So America is not a Christian nation in the sense that we're not like Israel, that we're not a theocracy, that God has, by divine revelation, given us a law and has specific promises for our nation. No, we don't have that. God has not given that to us. He gave that to Israel. And so we don't have certain rituals and things in our country that, God has specifically designed for us, okay? Now, obviously, in God's sovereignty, He uses our country and other countries as well for His purposes. And one of those has been America has been a great exporter of the gospel, and that's a good thing. So in that sense, no. And if you look at our Constitution, et cetera, it's not a religious document in that real strict sense, like Deuteronomy and Leviticus are. It's not that. But in another sense, America is a Christian nation in that it was largely shaped and informed by people who had a Christian worldview. So if you look at our founding documents, right out of the very beginning in the Declaration of Independence, there's an understanding of natural law, that there is a God, there is a creator, and that there are certain laws that come with that, and we all are aware of those, whether or not we're genuine believers in Jesus or not. And so that's right out of the gate. But you also look at, there's a few key things I think to think about, is that our laws and our Constitution were shaped by people who had a Christian worldview and an understanding, and in particular a Calvinist understanding of the way the world spins. And so a view of depravity and of salvation and God's rule and law and providence and things of that nature. And so what you'll find is if you look at the founders, and particularly I'm thinking the Continental Congress and the people who were represented there, nearly all of those people held membership in a church, like 98% of them. And membership then was not like it is now. It was a very strict requirement and public professions of faith and that sort of thing. So it's not very loosey-goosey like it is now. So that's one thing I think that's important. Another thing, there's a couple of professors, and I don't recall the university, did a study of all the writings of those founding fathers and sort of whittled it down to all the long documents. And they looked at who was quoted most often. And in terms of individual thinkers previous to the revolution, and also what books were quoted. And far and away, the Bible is quoted more than any other book. And I think it's like a third of all the quotations from the founding fathers during that particular era, from like mid-1700s to like 1810, was like 34% of the quotations are from the scriptures. And so when these people were writing on law and politics, the Bible was informing their view of what that should look like. And second to that, if you look at other writers that they are quoting, you have lots of men like Locke and Blackstone and people who had written on law and were largely shaped by the Bible in their views of law and believed in divine revelation. And so they felt like law and government should be influenced by that. They were against theocracy. Obviously, they came for religious freedom purposes, but they were not against the use of the scriptures to inform politics and law. And so in that sense, yes, America is a Christian nation in that it was largely shaped by a Christian worldview. And so I think we need to be careful when we talk about this, that we articulate it well, and that I think we can be proud of that heritage and hope to continue it, and knowing that when we allow our government and law to be informed by God's revelation, that we would see blessing. And when we deny and push that away and move towards a more humanistic, materialistic worldview, I think we will see ramifications of that as well. But we also need to not fall into the ditch of thinking that we are some sort of theocracy here and that God's given America these certain promises, because I think that's unbiblical and unhelpful, and I think can really begin to elevate country over the reign and rule of Jesus. And so I think keeping those distinctions in mind can be helpful as we try to understand and articulate what we are as a country.